Here we are for another main event of the 70s versus the 90s, and it's a hot take on vampire lore when I put George A. Romero's Martin against Abel Ferrara's The Addiction. And this one was a fun one to get through because both of these movies have like their own like flair to them, that make them great. So let's just dive right on into George A. Romero's Martin, which deals with the vampire mythology as kind of a mental illness. Here we have the title character Martin, played by John Amplis, brilliantly in his first film. This dude gives a very great internal performance because, like I said, it's dealt with as a mental illness and almost like a sexual kink, more or less. Sexual hang up that he has. The only way like he can like consummate sex with women is he has to drink their blood. But it's not like he's got razors and needles and shit like that knocks him out. It's just it's a different take on like the vampire shit. It's very like like I said, mental illness type thing. And it opens brilliantly with him on a train where he's like, we see him claim a victim, and you see the setup, knocks him out with whatever's in them damn needles that puts him to sleep. And then, cuts their veins open and drinks their blood, and it's implied you don't necessarily see him like do like sex to these women when they're unconscious. You see them like laying naked together, but you don't, it's more implied, which shows the true artistry of George A. Romero. You get less is more. You don't have to see everything to know how fucked up it was. And so when we see him getting picked up by his grandfather or some kind of relation, he's known as Grandfather Kuda in the film, played by Lincoln Mazel, he's absolutely brilliant, kind of looking like a Colonel Sanders type dude with the like white suit and the beard and everything. And this guy's like super religious, but he's also like very superstitious. He really believes that his cousin is a vampire, and so like he also lives with his granddaughter, played by Christine Forrest, who became a staple in George A. Romero's films. Also later became his wife. And George A. Romero even pops up in this film playing a priest, as well as makeup artist Tom Savini has a small role as the granddaughter's boyfriend. But it mostly just centers around this weird kind of like mental like game of cat and mouse between Martin and Grandfather Kuda. We see a lot of like kind of flashbacks of like Martin's exploits, back in like when he first became a vampire, so to speak. And those shots are in black and white, and they're done kind of like an old school gothic vampire movie. And one thing George A. Romero is really good at is creating a tension. There is a very steady buildup as we see Martin kind of struggle with his own addiction and mental illness. And, of course, and the grandfather's probably mentally ill as well. The granddaughter alludes to such. And the performance is in this film are amazing. These actors really didn't do much outside of George A. Romero films. And in a way, the film almost seems real, Even the way that he claims his victims and then like the kind of the calamities that ensue afterwards. Like there's one victim that he tries to claim who's cheating on her husband while he's out of town. And so it's like, first they can't really call the authorities because, he's not even supposed to be there. And then, it's just insanity. And then there's shit with homeless people and drug dealers and pimps and cops, a shootout and everything. The movie for being as low budget as it was, like it sure does have a lot of like excitement and thrills and shit that you would normally see in a movie with a lot bigger of a budget. But George A. Romero was always able to get like more with less, and which just proves how genius of a filmmaker he was. And then also like, Martin works in his grandfather's little meat market thing, and he delivers meat to a lot of these like lonely housewives and stuff. And one he ends up kind of starting a little relationship with, but then she ends up killing herself, which is ironic because it looks like the same way that like, Martin does his victims and stuff. And of course, Grandfather Kuda is like, I don't believe that suicide jive, and then just kills him. The movie ends with him putting a stake through his heart. It's a hell of a way to wake up in the morning. And, it's so brilliant, the buildup of it and just the irony of it, because there's a lot of things in this film that are funny, because there's even that scene where Martin's fucking with Grandfather Kuda. He's got the fangs and the cape, like the old school fucking Dracula type shit. He's just like, yeah, there's no magic, it's just, it's fucking sickness, And the way it's done, it's done brilliantly, as we move forward to Abel Ferrara's The Addiction, where he doesn't really treat vampirism as mental illness. It's more as an addiction, which I guess in terms could be considered of mental illness. Here, the film centers around a philosophy major in a New York university, played by Lily Taylor, who ends up bitten one night by a really hot vampire played by Annabella Shora. And I probably fucked that name all up, but I'm not good at pronouncing shit. She sires her, and then she kind of goes on this like almost like junkie like pursuit of claiming like victims and blood to suck and stuff. You know, very treated much like a heroin addict. We see her extract the blood from the guy's arm and inject it in her. All the while, this film is shot entirely in black and white, and it's very like stark, haunting, gritty. You know, of course, Abel Ferrara, another director that could get more with less. You know, because I mean, this film was produced by Russell Simmons, and you know, of course, that's why there's so many like hip hop hits of the time that were playing in the film. You know, sometimes they feel a little out of place. Like the movie itself is kind of all over the place, but there are some really brilliant moments. And of course, Lily Taylor, one of the greatest actors of all time, especially of her generation, and she gives a great internalized performance on a level with John Amplas in Martin. And then of course, we don't have near enough Christopher Walken, though. He kind of comes in as what starts out as a potential victim for Lily Taylor. It becomes like, oh, this dude's a fucking vampire too, only he's learned to, you know, control his shit. And, you know, we also see Edie Falco plays her friend in college, and Paul Calderon's one of the professors. And then there's a brilliant scene where like she finally gets her doctoral thesis approved and all. She's a fucking PhD now, and she throws a party, and like all of the people that she sired into vampires just eat, like fucking devour all of this room full of intellectuals. And if that movie had ended right there, that would have been perfect. Been a perfect movie. It would have fucking won this round. But then it goes into even more heavy-handed metaphors, because the heavy-handed metaphors that they put throughout the addiction is like enough to make it lose points. Because I get it, they're philosophy students, but you don't have to buy into the philosophy. You know, this all vampires is all about philosophy anyways. It's like, it's kind of a load of bullshit, you know. And but that fucking party sequence is like part of the reason why Abel Ferrara is considered a great director, because he'll push limits that most people won't, and that to be as overt, because he really leans into the vampire lore more so than George A. Romero actually. And I guess, you know, I don't know what it's like to be on heroin, so I can't really judge it from that perspective, because clearly Abel Ferrara was coming from a place that he knew of from either from himself or from other people about addiction, and you know, almost in a Burroughs-esque kind of way of depicting this. But that heavy-handed metaphor where she dies but she doesn't die and all this shit, kind of fakes her death so she can just live as a fucking vampire. It's just, I don't know, it's sinister. It's a lot more sinister than it wants to be, I guess, you know, kind of creating a dangerous atmosphere like a regular horror film. But unlike Martin, it tends to like not go by the rules at the same time it's breaking the rules. That's why Martin clearly wins this round, because it's able to balance that tightrope of when you make kind of an anti-anything, you not only have to break the rules, but you also have to follow the rules laid down by the cinema in this respective genre that it's in. And honestly, Martin plays better as a vampire movie than The Addiction does, because the scenes of like Martin trying to claim victims is a lot more intense. There's a lot of like, the blocking of it is very in just like, you can tell this is a precision director. Like George A. Romero was not to be trifled with. Whereas Abel Ferrara, you know, kind of a guerrilla style filmmaker that occasionally would shit brilliance. Like there's some shots in this scene like where she sires that fucking anthropology student, and her face is in the mirror while Lily Taylor's, that is a brilliant shot. And like I said, that party sequence, and there's most of the time when she catches a victim, you know, it's more like, you know, I mean, granted, Lily Taylor has no problem carrying the film. She's very capable of that. But, you know, her like endless nihilistic rants do kind of get old, you know, whereas like Martin's a little more like playful with its material while also being gritty and fucked up. So this round clearly goes to the 70s. For anybody keeping score, that's 43-34. 70s are up by 9. And they have been kicking ass lately. Like the 90s will come back every once in a while with a point or two, but like the 70s have been like steadily like growing that gap because like especially with the horror films, like they were doing shit because like really like that's what independent cinema looked like. We forget that George A. Romero was an independent filmmaker, much like Abel Ferrara. Like both those guys kind of like, you know, were able to operate in the realm of exploitation films, because there's a real thin line between exploitation films and independent filmmaking, you know, what we call indie cinema, you know. But at the end of the day, too, it's also what is the better movie. And Martin is clearly the better movie. A lot of these art house movies, they start out strong. They kind of have a good concept, but they just fall short because it's like kind of like throwing shit on the wall and seeing if it sticks. You know, you put a bunch of shit together. You rely on like really great actors because, like I said, the cast of The Addiction, it, you know, might be better actors than the cast in Martin, but I do not think they were doing better acting in The Addiction than the actors in Martin, you know. So that clearly shows you like George A. Romero was on his shit way more than Ferrara, and like able to like just create a chilling, solid horror film while at the same time poking fun at every fucking trope that he can in that genre. And granted, he only did one vampire movie, of course, known mostly for zombie movies and shit, but that's how good he was. He could basically do anything. So 43 to 34. 70s are up by 9. If I've said anything wrong, anything you disagree with, feel free to eviscerate me in the comments. Let me know if you have any recommendations. I do this shit every Saturday, a main event. And also I'll do bonus rounds here and there. You know, if I ain't got no time to do anything else, I'll just, you know, boredom. Like I'm working on my doctoral thesis, you know, like y'all, I'm inviting y'all on this journey with me, you know. Who really cares? You know, it's just like at this point, it's just my morbid curiosity. You know, spooky season is in full swing and I got the chills.